From a lead belcher base coat, dry brush with Stormhost Silver. For the base coat, I used the spray can for lead belcher and then just tidied up any uneven areas with paint, but you could always spray it something like black and paint the entirety metallic. With Stormhost Silver, you could probably do a bit of a heavier dry brush than this, but just to pick out all the raised detail. Paint the entire model with a 50-50 mix of Basilicanum Grey and Contrast Medium. You can try just on some of the flatter surfaces to pull away some of the excess paint, but actually the uneven finish on metals works quite well and is much quicker to do. And the doors of the side and the top of the rhino are going to be painted in yellow and hazards anyway, so don't worry about it too much. Sorry, the recording of the yellow was a bit skewed. That first shot was to show you what a singular layer of the yellow paint looks like, and just emphasise that this takes a little while because to build up yellow over a dark base coat. You may have more success by painting it something like a very pigmented white first and then overpainting with the yellow. Most paint ranges yellows are quite weak covering, but certainly the Games Workshop ones take a bit of time to get a good coverage. Glaze the edges of the doors both on top and on the sides with thinned Mournfang brown. On a model this small, you can actually have fairly rough looking blends, and because you're painting hazard stripes over it, it tends to get hidden. But what I would suggest is using thinned paint, and once you've painted on maybe a quarter of the entire distance of the door, then clean the brush with some water and then use that to feather out the edges. Using a stippling motion and quite thin paint, paint the centre of the doors with Uriel yellow. Again, this just makes the contrast between dark and light yellow a bit more stark and makes it more interesting to look at. If you've never glazed before, and I rarely do it, I probably should do it more, this allows for kind of to be quite loose because you're going to overpaint with hazard stripes anyway, so it's not going to be all that noticeable, but it does add to the effect. You can smooth the transitions of the brown into the yellow using a similar motion, just using the Averland Sunset quite thinned, just to take off the very harsh edges that you might be left with. Ironically, for the Iron Warriors, you actually use Black Legion paint for an awful lot of the steps now. So the first and probably the most obvious step would be the painting of the hazard stripes. I can't really give you a hard and fast rule on how to do it. You're kind of wanting to pull 45-degree lines and making them thin enough that they look to scale on the model. Because you're going to be painting many of these, I wouldn't get too caught up with being perfectly precise on them, as long as they're somewhat equidistant and reasonably straight. The biggest difficulty with the doors is when you look at them, they've got kind of that sawtooth pattern, so the centre is naturally in the centre, and you're not lining straight up. So what you do is when you paint the other side, you'll find them might slight misalign. To be honest, it doesn't matter and certainly doesn't end up noticeable. I would, as I suggested, or as you can see here, use quite thin paint, even if the first layer isn't fully opaque. It means any overspill can be quickly corrected, and then you can repaint it in a second layer to make the black a lot more noticeable. And here's just showing how I went about lining up the two sides. To make the surface of the tank then more interesting, I picked out the doors underneath the bolters with Black Legion as well. I picked it out in two layers because you wanted more of this as a strong finish as opposed to a contrast paint. Use thinned Black Legion, then thin down with a bit of water to shade over the upper portions of the stacks, I guess, just emphasising the deeper recesses. And like the deeper recesses on the stacks and the door windows, anywhere that needs a bit more definition, just to paint thinned Black Legion into these recesses as well. Don't spend too much time on this, just the things that you think are noticeable, because you will be doing this many times over in the scale and the number of tanks. I decided then to paint the upper part of the stacks with iron hand steel to try to differentiate the metals, but unless you went as bright as Stormwood Silver, it's not that noticeable, so I wouldn't waste your time. Pick out the lenses on the top of the tank, kind of at the middle part of the doors, and the lights then on the sides, firstly with white scar. Paint the top lenses then with really any thin contrast to your choice. I went with Blood Angel's Red to give them a red glow, and as long as you've got some white showing through the middle, it'll give kind of an effective light. I also took the time with this to actually paint a very, very rough OSL kind of technique, literally just painting splotches of thin contrast paint in the front of the lights. At this scale, it actually looks better than you would think, the lights being quite small and any kind of fine detail kind of gets lost. It does give the impression that you've done a lot of effort where you really haven't. And then repeat this process on the lights at the front with Tesseract Glow, again allowing it to spill over onto the front where it just gives the impression of OSL again. And this is the finished result. If you like this video, feel free to check out the channel. I have numerous other painting tutorials. I'm not sure yet am I going to do more in Legions Imperialis. If there's a demand for it, certainly we could work through the Legions, but I said I'd do one that was more for fun first off. I quite like the Iron Warriors, and I think at this scale they look really, really good.